Most of us may not be familiar with the story of Harry Tyson Moore, but let me tell you about Harry Tyson Moore. Harry Tyson Moore on December 25th of 1951, which was on Christmas Day, he was celebrating his 25th wedding anniversary. A bomb went off underneath their home on his anniversary, killing both him and his wife. The reason why they were killed was because they were registering people to vote. As we remember also what occurred on January 30th of 1956 when Martin Luther King House was bombed by segregationists in retaliation for the success in which was being had because of the Montgomery bus boycott. So this actually makes us think about the words in which the actor Harry Belafonte had reflected on a week before Martin Luther King was assassinated. Martin Belafonte said, I remember the last time that we were together at my home shortly before he was murdered. He seemed quite agitated, Martin Luther King, that is, and preoccupied. So I asked him what the problem was. According to Belafonte, King responded by saying, I have come upon something that disturbs me deeply. We have fought hard and long for integration, and I know that we will win. But I have come to believe that we are integrating into a burning house. I would also add a house which is on fire. I'm afraid that America has lost the moral vision that she had had, and I'm afraid that even as we integrate, we are walk we are walking into a place that does not understand that this nation needs to be deeply concerned with the plight of the poor and those who are disenfranchised. Until we commit ourselves to ensuring the underclass is given justice and opportunity, I fear that I'm integrating my people into a burning house. So at that point, the Belafonte asked him, he said, then what should we do? King responded by saying that we need to become firemen. Let us not stand by and let the house burn. Over this past summer, over this past from June, and it is still happening, Black, Indigenous, people of color have brought injustice of racism into our national attention. We saw that the fire has been flared up again and again, day after day, that there was fright. And most of us wanted to do something. Most of us wanted to pick up a bucket of water and to throw out on the flames. But the size of the blaze seems to make our individual efforts useless. We don't need scare tactics. They reinforce the fear and paralysis. We don't need numbers and statistics. They may help in seeing the landscape, but they can produce numbness and despair. We need to talk about justice. We need to talk about how is it that justice could put out this fire. We need to talk about justice without the rhetoric, without fanning the flames, without attacking fear or intimidation. John F. Kennedy once said, which is a favorite quote of mine uh, from Dante. He said that the hottest place in hell are received for those who, in the period of moral crisis, maintain their neutrality. That scene, which was taken from a play in Forno, whereby he also said that the world will let no fame of theirs endure, but justice and compassion must disdain them. Let us not talk about them, but look and pass. Unlearning injustice may or may not be a path to taking action to eliminate justice. In a society where individualism and growth is often not only the starting place, but also that ending point. Strategies for unlearning injustice often ends within the place of complacency and inaction. So, what should we do as Unitarian Universalists within Justice Ohio? Well, the flames are already there. We see the flames in the schools, we see the flames in churches, we see the flames in neighborhoods, we see the flames in workplaces. There is poverty, there is crime. It's not an issue of these flames is out there or with other people. No, it is within us. It's within you and I and others within this country, this world in which we are living in. Our house is burning. It is burning under us, and we need to pick up the buckets and start to carry that water out now. As if we are volunteers in our fire department in a rural community or a small town, we need to be a part of that fire line. When everyone realizes that when a spark is flying, anything can catch a fire. Let us be a community that is alert, that we could see those signs of spark and embers, and we could find a way we could put out that larger flame which could develop. Let us keep talking. Let us keep conversation going. Let us put out this fire. And yes, indeed, only justice could do that, could keep this house from burning down. Edwin, tell us some more about that fire, my friend.
Well, good morning, everyone. I am just so amazed at how things come together. As you know, we're talking about this flame, this fire that is taking place. I really don't think that. I think we all know how much our country and our lives and our everything that we call normal is just it's on fire. And it's really kind of interesting that, for me, and that this really kind of came together at a time for myself where I have a lot of family that's out in California. And as we know from the past few years and the summer, there's so many fires out there. And it's interesting that I'm going to use the image of wildfires as a metaphor for basically what I'd like to talk about for a few moments about how do we choose to go from here. We know there's a fire. We know our homes are on fire. We know that our nation's on fire. And when I think about fire, I think about, well, who puts them out? We think about firemen. Actually, one of my son is a fireman. And I talked to him about what it's like there. And he says, things he said, you never want to forget that fires are natural and sometimes they're not natural. But in any case, flames are merciless and they're indiscriminate. And they don't care about who you voted for. They don't care about your faith or choice of non-faith. They don't care about your values. They just burn. And so as we look at a time that we are now, and as I said, the question I really want to speak to for a few moments here is, in the midst of a fire, how do we choose to go? How do we choose to be from here? And I think in that we need to look. My challenge for us today, for myself, as everyone, is to really kind of examine three questions, three decisions that we need to make. I think the first one is a decision to escape. The second is a decision to rebuild, and the third is a decision to build a better home for tomorrow. And as I walk through these three decisions here in our short time, I want to share a short story that I had read about, and as a matter of fact, I had seen it when the individual was talking. But her name is Nicole Jolly. She's a nurse at a hospital out in Paradise, California, and she was being interviewed by some reporter on CNN about how she escaped from a deadly wildfire and how she thought her life was over as flames surrounded her car. They filled it with smoke. And then when she thought, the end was near, she had her phone with her. She called her husband. She said, I called him and said, Nick, I'm going to die and I'm not going to make it out of here. There's just flames everywhere and I don't know what to do. She recalled her husband urging her to run. He said, don't die, run. If you're going to die, die fighting. You have got to run. So she said she just jumped out of her car and she ran. There was a lack of oxygen, and along with the ash and hot embers getting into her eyes, that made it hard to escape. But I just put my hand out and I closed my eyes, and I ended up touching the back of a fire truck. I got over to the side of the fire truck, knocked on the doors, and 2 firemen came out, picked me up, and put me in their fire engine and put a fire blanket on the windows. And it was just amazing. But the ordeal wasn't over because the firefighters said that they needed air support or they wouldn't make it. And then out of nowhere, she said she saw a bulldozer clear a path for the group. She says when she arrived to work, she and her other nurses had to stay busy helping others. We didn't think about ourselves and our possessions that we had just lost. We need to make a decision to escape. There are so many, if you're anywhere near like me, there are many days I wake up and I say, I can't turn on that news because I don't know what craziness is going to be out there next. And it feels like many things are coming apart. But it requires a daily decision to not lose hope. It requires a daily decision that no matter how bad things look and how bad they feel, that I've got to get out and I've got to escape this fire. And I've got to help others to do it. It's a decision to escape. It's a decision that says, I'm going to do what I can. Just as she got in the fire truck and the firefighters. So I got a problem because we need help to get support or we're not going to make it. And somewhere in every instance, there comes hope out of nowhere. We've got to keep hope. We've got to decide that we are not going to remain trapped in what is going on in our world now. Second decision, a decision to rebuild. A lot of the controversy exists when people talk about rebuilding, because honestly, people sometimes they feel like, geez, how can we rebuild? How, so much has been torn down. Where do we even start? It is a controversial decision. And some people think that rebuilding puts an unfair burden on others, particularly those who were not directly impacted, to shoulder the work and the effort. And many times we look at, there are some of us who've been very blessed, whose lives have not been majorly impacted by some of what is going on in our world and our nation. We don't live in neighborhoods that have been broken up by violence or and destruction through protests. We don't live in areas, we may not personally live in an area that is subject to a lot of voter suppression or other types of things. And so it's a burden that we all bear, because we all are impacted by when there is just injustice anywhere, there's a lack of justice everywhere. And we have got to take on that, to make that decision that we are going to rebuild in this moment, and that we, and I keep saying we, are going to go forward. And that's each and every one of us, no matter where we're coming from. Some are saying, well, okay, we're going to rebuild, but where else could we go? Or do we need to do it here? Can I do it here? Honestly, that's a question each one of us is going to have to wrestle with. It's an acknowledgement that we have to dig deep. We have to just kind of dig deep inside ourselves and be strong and be patient and just know that we are going to get through this moment and we're going to get through it together. We have to acknowledge that some people who have been directly impacted. When I talk about directly impacted, there are those of us who have ourselves been, or we know people who have been directly impacted by anything ranging from voter suppression to unfair sentencing, to who have been impacted by bail issues in our criminal justice world, who have been impacted in all sorts of ways. You pick your injustice, you'll find somebody you know who's been impacted. But it's a choice that we are going to build together. Part of that build, making that choice is a real acknowledgement that there have been experiences of deep personal loss that can't be replaced. When I talk about this, I think of so much of what has happened as our nation wrestles with this, with the pandemic, and that there are those who are not occupying seats next to some of us because of what has happened, and because we've seen whether it's a loss of leadership at our national level, or there haven't been resources, or just outright injustices. And these are deep personal losses that can't be replaced. We need to put our arms around each other, acknowledge that, and know that that needs to fuel our decision and desire to move forward. And it's also an acknowledgement, it's the people who matter. How will we be with one another? This is something that is so important as we wrestle. I think sometimes we can all become so focused on moving forward and making changes, and we create a lot of friction between ourselves. It's an intentional decision of how we will be with one another, how we will express and live our values, how we will express and embrace one another as we all work together through a painful time and move to a point where we can put out these flames. We can rebuild what has been destroyed. And the third decision I asked you to examine is a decision to build a better home for tomorrow. Somebody said something I thought was really interesting. They said, rebuilding, when we talk about rebuilding, when we talk about correcting, when we talk about fixing, when we talk about changing, it is an opportunity to create not exactly a dream home, but a better home for where we are now in life. And whether you're talking about a literal home that's been destroyed by a wildfire, or we're talking about a better and more safe and more just community that we want to live in, we aren't going to get the dream community, but we can work towards it. We need to create something that's going to be better than what we have now. And we're going to face a lot of challenges with that. There's going to be confusion about how we start. There's going to be confusion about who's involved in the work. And if you volunteer, thank you so much for your volunteering. But to go where our former First Lady went, we need to volunteer like our lives depend on it. Because there are many who are in a position to help, or who could be in a position to help, who themselves are affected. We need to bring them with us, creating not exactly a dream home, but a better home. And finally, we need to choose, as we're making that decision about a better home and a better community, we need to choose to build and to walk in uncharted territory. It's when people think about building a home, and you talk about building a new one, it's not so much about just throw a roof up and walls and let's move in. It's about taking the time to pick what you want and how you want it, and designing something that's going to be better than what you had. So many reimagining efforts are going forward. Just as we are reimagining our police and our systems of law and justice, let us also reimagine how we can and will be with each other in that work and in this life that we're building together. Amen.
I'm the Reverend Joan Van Beesler, Director of UU Justice Ohio, and it is my distinct pleasure and privilege to introduce our first speaker today, who's the Reverend Connie Simon. Now, she was called to be the minister of First Unitarian Church in Cincinnati back in August of 2018. Now, prior to entering the ministry, she held a number of positions in corporate law and education and government, and served as program director for a Philadelphia nonprofit. Now, at the heart of each of her positions, she says there has been a desire to serve others. And Reverend Connie describes her ministry as healing people from the inside out so they can do the outside in work so desperately the world needs. Now, as an avid historian, Reverend Connie also teaches Unitarian Universalist history at the Midwest Leadership School. She's the editor of the Dictionary of Unitarian and Universalist Biography, and is working to uncover the stories of biracial, indigenous people, people of color, and others in our UU faith from marginalized identities. And so, Reverend Connie, I want to welcome you and thank you for being here. And as soon as I find a way to click on your name, I will highlight you. There you are. Somebody already did it for me. Great. And take it away, dear.
All right. Thank you, Joan. Thank you so much for having me here this morning. And I really like that analogy of the house being on fire. And I think you may hear some of those notes in what I'm about to say, because I want to talk about kind of where we are right now. Maybe the election's over, I don't know. But yeah, a couple of weeks ago, this thing happened. On November 7th, we decided that Election Day had finally ended, kind of. Enough votes had been counted to declare former Vice President Joe Biden and Senator Kamala Harris victorious in the states of Nevada and Pennsylvania, giving them the electoral votes needed to become the president-elect and vice president-elect of the United States. And a lot of people were excited. They filled the streets and cities and towns across America. They sang and they danced and they marched, and they were just celebrating. Now, some were celebrating an end to the division of discord that has plagued us for the last 4 years, or at least they tell themselves it's only been the last 4 years. Some celebrated a change in policies, others an end to the disregard of the rule of law as they saw it. Washington Post columnist Dana Milbank was just one of many people who quoted President Gerald Ford's post-Watergate line that our long national nightmare is over. He wrote that Donald Trump has lost the presidency. Americans have sent packing the man who made the lives of so many a hell for the last 4 years, with constant chaos, unbridled vitriol, and attacks on the foundations of democracy. There may be difficulty in the days ahead because of gratuitous court challenges and baseless claims of fraud, he said. The rage Trump has induced in supporters and opponents alike will take time to dissipate. But for a moment, let us rejoice. Our democracy has survived. Now, there were also people celebrating Kamala Harris specifically, the first woman, first African-American woman, and first person of South Asian descent to be vice president of the United States. And I'm happy too. I'm glad to see that our democracy has survived. Glad to see the power of the people to vote for their elected leaders. I'm glad to see so many different people of different identities and ethnicities and backgrounds coming together to elect our leaders. The right to vote is precious. People have fought and died for it. You know, as of this morning, 79,784,165 people voted for Joe Biden for president. The system worked. And for that, I am happy. Now, I'm also proud of Kamala Harris. She's so smart and so talented. She's younger than I am and is about to be the vice president of the United States, a Black woman. A friend texted me a picture of all the past vice presidents of the US, kind of in a block of small squares of black and white photos, like a yearbook. All these white men, and then this full-bodied color shot of Kamala Harris leaning against the block of pictures. I am so proud of her. And there's another group of folks who are happy, the ones who are happy because we won and they lost. I get it. I truly get it. The fervor, the passion, the commitment to a particular political party or a cause. And over a period of time, I suppose it can create a sense of us versus them. But I gotta tell you, it troubles my mind and it doesn't sit well with my soul at all. I consider Donald Trump to be a crude, vulgar narcissist who has had some economic and professional success in life and whose views on many issues, including race, class, the economy, climate change, and the coronavirus, are wildly inconsistent with mine. And 73,763,979 people voted for him. They can't all be racist, xenophobic, transphobic, horrible people, can they? I don't think so. Those 79 million people who voted for Biden, are they all anti-racist, inclusive, welcoming, and wonderful people? I don't think so. Not all Biden voters are good people, and not all Trump voters are horrible people. They were just as passionate, just as committed to their candidate as Biden supporters were to theirs. Just because someone voted for Donald Trump doesn't make them evil. Look, racism, homophobia, transphobia, etc., are never okay. But isn't it okay to have different views on policy, different approaches to solving problems? They are not bad people any more than we are good. They are not wrong any more than we are right. That's the universalist in me talking. Now, I can hear some of you screaming at me right now through Zoom, Reverend Connie, Donald Trump is horrible. He won't concede the elections. Republicans are enabling him. He does terrible things. You just don't understand. Trust me, I get it. I'm not completely naive. But I'll tell you this, my faith tells me that the first thing we've got to do is calm down. In what I guess can be called his victory speech, Joe Biden said, "For all those of you who voted for President Trump, I understand the disappointment tonight. I've lost a couple of times myself. It's time to put away the harsh rhetoric, lower the temperature, see each other again, listen to each other again. And to make progress, we have to stop treating our opponents as enemies." I agree. We need to turn down the level of vitriol in our political discourse and bring back civility. All of us. It wasn't helping anything. It was only making things worse, causing people to become even more entrenched in their positions. That was fanning the flames. We need a return to decency, or at least a return to the appearance of decency and civility in government and politics. It's time to unclench our fists. This was an historic election, but so was the election of Barack Obama in 2008. And still, the presidency of Donald Trump happened. Electing Biden and Harris doesn't automatically solve all our problems. There are some very angry people out there who found something appealing in the rhetoric of the current president. They're often described as rabid in their support. But have we stopped to ask, what is the source of their anger? I think it's really not anger at all. It's fear. It's fear of losing their livelihood, their ability to pay their rent or mortgage, to buy food, to pay for healthcare. And they're not the only ones who are afraid. Many of us are afraid. That's why we've got to get to work on economic justice. According to the Center for Community Solutions, Cleveland was the poorest large city in the United States. Almost 31% of its residents were living in poverty in 2019. In Cincinnati, where I am, the number was 23.1%. All over this state, people are struggling economically, and it's only been made worse by the pandemic. It's time for us to work harder than ever for fundamental change in our economic system, to ensure that everyone earns a living wage and has access to affordable health care, adequate housing, and healthy food. We have to keep pushing on voter education, registration, and engagement. Turn on the news. We're watching in real time systemic efforts to undermine the integrity of our elections and to suppress votes, especially those of poor Black and brown voters. This election ripped the lid off the cauldron of systemic racism simmering in the groundwater of this country. It's boiled over into all areas of our society, affecting every one of us. Fear of Black and brown bodies is rampant in this country as the dominant culture, white folks, fear they're losing their identity and their power. The problem with this is that it's rooted in a paradigm of scarcity, that there's not enough money, enough influence, enough power to go around. Remember the rallying cry in opposition to the racial justice protests this summer? They want to take away our neighborhoods, our way of life. They want to bring violence to our cities. They are dangerous, and their revolution must be quashed at all costs. The truth is that we, Black and brown people, are tired and weary and frustrated and, yes, angry. That's why we took to the streets. Now, as Unitarian Universalists, we say we are committed to the inherent worth and dignity of all people. We say we are committed to justice, equity, and compassion in human relations. Well, now's the time for us to prove it. Unitarian Universalists must continue to work to dismantle white supremacy culture in this country. We must continue to examine our existing systems and identify the places where whiteness and white culture are privileged. We must continue to do the hard work of personal reflection and introspection that will allow us to see where we are vulnerable to exploitation by regimes such as the current administration, that want to exploit people's fears and cause them to turn against their neighbors. We must continue to educate ourselves in anti-racism and take what we learn to heart by living into our UU theology, our principles, and our core values. We need to empower the voices of those who have been marginalized for too long. Black and brown people, Indigenous people, poor people, disabled people, and LGBTQ folks. It's time to center their experiences. I'm not saying that the experiences of other folks aren't important. I'm saying that right now we must be committed to the liberation of those who have been marginalized. And that means centering their experiences, hearing their voices, and listening to their pain, because their pain is our pain. If we are all truly interdependent beings in an interconnected web of life, that must also mean that none of us are free until all of us are free. We must help our siblings become free. So when John asked me to speak here today, I said, well, what do you want me to talk about? And he said that he'd heard my thing was racism, and that would be great for today. And while I hope I haven't disappointed him by talking about things besides race, it's true that racism is one of my things. Look at me. Because of the color of my skin, I bring the issue of racism with me wherever I go. My first career was as a tax lawyer. For years, I was one of only a handful of women and the only Black woman doing corporate tax litigation in Boston. In my second career, I did finance and regulatory work for a large telecommunications company. My job involved meeting with mayors in Eastern Arkansas, North Mississippi, and West Tennessee cities and towns. Believe me, I know racism. I've seen it. And now I move in UU spaces where there tend not to be many people who look like me. Did you know that there are fewer than 10 Black women ministers leading UU churches in our entire denomination? Actually, I think the number's only like 7 or 8. I can count them by name. So I get it. Wherever I go, people want me to talk about racism. But right now, I'm not sure that's the biggest flame. It's a big one, but I'm not sure it's the biggest flame. We can't even begin to tackle racism with those 73 million Trump voters right now. Many of them simply aren't in a place to hear it. We've drawn the battle lines too deep and too wide. So what now? What do we do now with these folks who are angry or scared, who put up a new Trump sign for every Biden sign you put out? What do we do with those who were disinterested or disenfranchised in this election, who didn't vote at all? We can't just throw them away. They're our family, our neighbors, our coworkers, and our friends. So liberals, I tell you, this is not the time to gloat over our victory. This is not the time to be vindictive or antagonistic toward political opponents. This is not the time to perpetuate those attitudes of us versus them. This is the time to reach out to one another. As long as white folks are fighting each other, you're not in a position to do anti-racism or anti-oppression work. Truth be told, what you're doing is oppressing one another, othering one another by passing judgment and pasting labels on each other. Before we can make big systemic change, we, all of us, have to at least be able to talk to one another in a civil manner. It's time to extend an olive branch and start that healing process. It's time to stop using liberal and conservative as dirty words. It's time for dialogue and reaching out to those who are disenfranchised and those with whom we disagree, mending our friendships and our family relationships. Only then will we be able to come together to solve our big problems, to work together, to be flexible and innovative and find creative solutions to these ugly issues that have plagued us for years. It's time to focus on our mission, not on who has the power, not on any one individual, not asking what's in it for me. It's time to focus on who we want to be as Americans and as global citizens. It's time to build back better, to rebuild stronger, to rebuild more wisely, more inclusively. To paraphrase Sarah Eileen Lawal, it's time to remember our shared humanity, our universal kinship, our interdependence. It's time to unclench our fists and breathe together. It's time to recognize the spark of the divine inside all of us, even those we're not quite sure about. We can do this if we really want to. We just have to want to. We have to want to survive, want to live, want to build better. We've seen democracy in action. Can you imagine how much more we could accomplish if we infused our democracy with inclusion and love and compassion for all? If we work together for our common good? It's time for we the people to seek that thing which unites us. Somehow it seems appropriate to end my remarks today with comments from former President Barack Obama. He said, "It will be up to not Joe and Kamala, but each of us to do our part, to reach out beyond our comfort zone, to listen to each other, to lower the temperature, and to find some common ground from which to move forward. I couldn't have said it better. Thank you.
Connie, thank you so much for those incredibly powerful thoughts. You've given us a great deal to ponder. Now we're going to break into some breakout rooms of about 5 to 6 people. And during the next 20 minutes, you have a chance to discuss with others the thoughts that Connie has presented to us, that the Reverend Connie Simon has given us, as well as the presentations by Samuel Prince and by Edwin Fuller. So if you will bear with me for just a moment as I create the breakout rooms for you all, and you will soon see a little invitation on your screen to join a breakout room. 20 minutes goes quickly, doesn't it?
It can, yes.
Yes.
Well done. Excellent.
People I met.
Now, I don't want to take, I mean, we don't have the time. It would take actually the rest of the day to hear a report out from each of the breakout rooms. But I would like to see if there were some really strong learnings that you had in the breakout room that you would like to share with everyone else. And I'll ask you to keep on mute if you're not sharing, but unmute yourself when you want to share. Okay? So we'll just open this up. Who has something that they'd like to share with the large group that you learned or found out during the breakout room?
Well, we considered the intersection of economic justice and racial justice as a possible way to build bridges and talking with people who are fearful for their economic well-being, to try and have common cause among those who are impoverished and in need of jobs, income, healthcare, and the like.
Okay. And I see some comments in the chat. Lori noting that we need to build the bridges, and that Gary is saying they had a great discussion. So you can also put your comments in the chat box if you want. Who else would like to share something that was an aha moment for you?
Well, I had never heard of the organization called Braver Angels, which sounds as though it's rather like the program of nonviolent communication, but I'm very glad to know of this braverangels.org and can look for resources there. So thank you.
Just to let you know that Susan Smith, who's speaking this afternoon, and I are both taking the work of the lessons and the learnings from Braver Angels, and we're turning it into new community conversations starting this winter. So yes, it's a great organization. Who else has something they'd love to share?
Will there be a recording of Reverend Connie's speech that we could share with others?
I am recording the entire the entire sessions today, the whole assembly. Yep.
I think that belongs in Beloved Conversations curriculum. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I would like to just offer that in our group, we were recognizing the struggle of asking, when we talk about healing and making connections and building bridges and all of that, the struggle of asking people that were most harmed to build a bridge to their oppressor, to the person who was harming them. And I don't want to ask them to do that. I don't think they should have to. So how do we, I mean, I wouldn't want to, and I wouldn't want to be put in a position to feel like I'm not playing fair if I don't join the club and build a bridge. So that is something that several of us have commented on struggling with us. How do we do that?
It's a struggle. Yeah. Thank you, Deb. Thank you. Anybody else want to share something that you aha moment or something you learned. Oh, Carol typed in, I think we need to set aside the fact of the one action of voting. They had reasons for their votes as I had reasons for mine, she says. But I believe that we can find common ground to move forward to work for some justice. We may have to humbly do their passion, but if we can agree that their issue is important, I can do that if I can find it. We need to learn to listen, says Liz, learn to understand what others are saying because we may be talking about the same thing. Definitions, clarifying. Okay. And Carol says, yes, find a common ground. I can choose to let them live in respect. Okay. So those are good comments. Thank you for sharing that. Would anybody else like to share? We have room for a couple more.
I can jump in here with a comment. This came up in our group, and I think it resonates with other people. It's this: how do you find the charity and also the skill to be able to build that bridge to the other side? Just especially with what continues to go on right now after the vote.
And that's going to have to be answered in the future, because at this point, I don't think any of us have the answer. We're going to have to build that plane while flying it.
I just want to fess up for other people who might be feeling this way, that, I just, it's hard for me to find the charity to feel kindness towards people who have harbored such hate. Mm-hmm. And so I just want to say that for everybody else out there who might be similarly struggling, I'm not feeling like I'm ready for a kumbaya moment. That's the reality.
And that may be a question of timing too. Definitely.
Well,
thank you.
I must say that I'm in the same boat with and for me it's not a matter of I don't know if timing is it's not my healer. Time is not my healer. I mean, it's yes, I will always be respectful to people, but I am not, I'm one who is not struggling with that. There's a great article that I read from Huffington Post about that. I mean, and I made that comment within the group that I was with. Here's a cis white woman, single mother, disabled son. And she wrote this really nice article in the Huffington Post, which had really gained some notoriety.
Yes.
And I could see her point.
Mm-hmm. Yep, I know the article. It's something that we're struggling with as we build our curriculum. It's part of it. And some other comments. Jeff Gamblee says, is it rooted in fear, as Connie suggested? Where does the fear come from, or the hate come from? From a feeling of injustice, says Lori. And Carol says, I think this is a time of deep personal reflection. How do I really want to live our first principle? Even with people with whom I disagree, even people who don't recognize my humanity. And Carol Womeldorf says, so much hurt out there and in here. Self-care, healing, a foundation for giving. And Alice is asking for posting a link. Are you talking about the article from the Huffington Post?
Yes.
Okay, that I do not have, but we'll make sure that we get that for you.
I'll get it.
Okay.
I have it here. I was, I was not.
Okay.
Let me make sure that it's.
So are there, while Samuel posts that, are there any other final comments? Because
it's
a long one.
I should have. Yeah. I'm going to break it down. Sorry.
And Nidhi says, the young man saying this with love, she says, for those who may not know about this, please check out the origins of the song Kumbaya. Thank you. And Liz says, the young man I asked to leave my house for trying to tell a racist joke completely flipped as an older person. Okay.
Joan?
Yes.
The New York Times today has a wonderful article 9 non-obvious ways to have deeper conversations.
Yes.
And I don't, and that's richness.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you so much. And if you have that link, you could put it into the chat for us, or we could put it into the chat after or during lunch. Because I do know that we want to break at this point for you all to go and get your lunch. It's brown bag, as we said. We will leave this room open, this Zoom room open, so that you can bring your lunch back and discuss with people in an unfacilitated way until we start up again at noon. Okay? And there are some wonderful comments in the chat. Karen says, I hope we can make stronger ties between our principles number 1 and 7.